Welcome back. Oh my goodness. Today we are diving into Acts 23. So this chapter is full of drama. Why am I saying like that? Paul stands before the Sanhedrin and there's a very deadly conspiracy that is coming against him. And then he's just like, we see God's protection in Paul's life, where God comes up and protects him from every plan of over 40 people that were fasting to make sure that Paul is killed. Hey, grab your Bibles and see, let us unpack how God can turn these oppositions into opportunities and how God protects all of us. Hey, let's get started in Acts chapter 23 with any version that you're using. I'm using NLT, New Living Translation, for this particular chapter so that we can understand it better. Hey, let's read together. Verse 1 says, gazing intently at the high council, Paul began, brothers, I have always lived before God with a clear conscience. Instantly, Ananias the high priest commanded those close to him to slap him on the mouth. But Paul said to him, God will slap you, you corrupt hypocrite. What kind of judge are you to break the law yourself by ordering me struck like that? Those standing near Paul said to him, do you dare to insult God, his high priest? Verse 5, I'm sorry, brothers. I didn't realize he was the high priest. Paul replied, for the scriptures say you must not speak evil of any of your rulers. Praise the living God. Let's first stop there for a moment and just think and ponder and think about this particular passage. So we ended chapter 22 when Paul was before the high council, and now today he is responding and he's looking at them and he's like, you know what, Paul began, brothers, I have always lived before God with a clear conscience. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh my goodness, Paul was declaring boldly before the Sanhedrin that for me, I have fulfilled my duties for God's law, that I've done this, I've played my part to make sure that God's law are fulfilled. Even when he was struck on the mouth, like he was beaten and someone was slapping him on the mouth, he insists on his integrity and he respects God's law. And it's like, you know what, I respect who God is. In other words, him saying that my conscience is clear before God is like, I've done my work. The work that God has told me to do, I have done it. I do not know whether you can also come in presence of God and you're like, you know what, I have always lived before God with a clear conscience. That integrity that Paul had is everything that really you look at and you're like, oh my goodness, am I even somewhere close to him? You know what I'm saying? So something that we can draw from Paul here is that as a disciple of Christ, we must live with integrity at all times. Even in under false accusations and someone is accusing you that you've done this and this, there has to be a very an integrity that you carry, that you know what, I have done this. Praise the living God. But then we continue and the Bible says, instantly Ananias the high priest, they commanded those close to him and like slap this dude, and they slapped him. Now they didn't slap a young boy, they slapped a big man, someone who has written, who has been preaching to the Gentiles, and he is a very big commander. You know, he was a big commander of the Roman Empire. So, and then the high priest is slapping him, and you wonder, why would this guy really slap him? And someone was saying that Paul was maybe being sarcastic when he said, you know what, I'm sorry, you know. But then he slaps him. Paul was like, God will slap you, you corrupt hypocrite. Now those words are really hard. They're really hard when they say to the council. It's like, what kind of judge are you to break the law yourself by ordering me struck like that? Because Paul had understood the law. He knew what the law was about. So slapping him was like, you broke the law. And then the high priest was slapped Paul because he was convicted that Paul was telling the truth. You know, but some people believe that Paul's answer when he says that, you know what, I am sorry, brothers, in verse 5, he was just being sarcastic. Why? Because the priests by that time, they knew there's a way they used to dress. So they would dress in their garments and come as priests. So he knew that these priests had to be respected. But now he responds to him in that manner. But remember, they slapped him, and it's because of the order of the high priest. Yeah, but then some people think that maybe Paul was ignorant, that this was not a high priest. So some scholars argue that he did not recognize Ananias as a high priest at all. That maybe at that moment he was not putting on his garments as a high priest. But also, there are also some possible reasons that Paul's eyesight, Paul had a very poor eyesight. He talks about it in Galatians chapter 4 from verse 15, verse 16, and also chapter 6, 11. That is Galatians. And he talks about his eyesight, that he didn't have a good eyesight. Maybe at this moment, he didn't see that this is a high priest. But Paul was discerning enough. He would discern in the spirit. He would at least use spiritual eyes. What do you think about that? So Ananias, he just tempered with the wrong person at this moment. That's where he gets those words coming out of Paul. And then some people also think that he's being sarcastic. He was just being ironic. And you know why? He didn't recognize that this is a kind of behavior that was befitting to the priest, because that's why he says, I'm sorry. He apologizes. But also, this high priest, we see that he didn't uphold the law very well. He broke it by ordering those people to strike who? Paul. And then Paul is like, are you really a high priest? Yeah, so that's why he was being sarcastic. That's what people think. But other people say that, you know what, he was reminded. I love Paul, that he was reminded that, hey, we are not supposed to beat a high priest. That is Exodus 22:28. That, you know what, he was reminded of the law, that we should submit to the elders, we should respect them. So you look at his respective correction. When he realizes that he is wrong, he's in a wrong, he is correcting the mistake with a lot of respect. Praise the living God. And he apologizes. So his words, these words that he speaks, they carry a very great regret, that I am sorry. That I would rather, being sarcastic, I'm not being sarcastic right now, I'm really sorry. If I had known, I wouldn't have spoken that way to the high priest. So he understood. So Paul shows his commitment to the scriptures, that, you know what, these scriptures, I will respect the people that God has placed in the place of leadership as priests. Praise the living God. So he finishes by saying that, of course, he has fulfilled his cautiousness, and he had done what God has done. Praise the living God. So let's live with integrity as children of God, as disciples of Christ. Let's continue. Verse 6 says, Paul realized that some members of the high council were Sadducees and some were Pharisees. So he shouted, brothers, I am a Pharisee, as were my ancestors, and I am on trial because my hope is in the resurrection of the dead. This divided the council, the Pharisees against the Sadducees, for the Sadducees said there is no resurrection or angels or spirits, but the Pharisees believe in all of these. So there was a great uproar. Some of the teachers of religious law were Pharisees, jumped up and began to argue forcefully. We see nothing wrong with him, they shouted. Perhaps the spirit for an angel spoke to him. As the conflict grew more violent, the commander was afraid they would tear Paul apart. So he ordered his soldiers to go and rescue him by force and take him back to the fortress. 11. That night the Lord appeared to Paul and said, be encouraged, Paul. Just as you have been a witness to me here in Jerusalem, you must preach the good news in Rome as well. Let's stop there from verse 6 to 11. We see that Paul is a wise being. He saw the opportunity that, my dear, I'm standing in front of this guy who has slapped me and I've spoken bad to. I cannot win this case. So he had to get a way of how to get out of this place. He had to be wise. So this is what he did. He used the two groups that they are not in good connection. Those are the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And he's like, okay. And you know this method of divide and rule, politicians use it a lot most of the time. So Paul, in that place where he's in front of the people, counsel different people, and he's like, no, what am I going to use? Let me use this. And so they rush. Paul is standing in front of the Pharisees, and he's like, you know what? He shifts the debate. because every eye was on him. They're like pointing to him. So he shifted from where he was, where they were speaking about him. Now he shifted to the place of Pharisees and the Sadducees. This is what he does. He affirms that, you know what, my heritage, I am a Pharisee by heritage, and his hope is in resurrection, and something that the Sadducees do not want. They don't deal with that. You get? But Pharisees, for them, they perceive that you know what, for us, we believed in the resurrection of the dead, but Sadducees did not. So he shifts the debate from where it was to here, where everyone is like, okay, now they began to fight themselves, and Paul is standing in the middle and is just watching the game going on. That was wise, you know. So the Pharisees rushed to Paul's defense because at this moment they shared the same belief. And what was the belief? That they shared the same belief in resurrection, something that the Sadducees denied. That for us, we don't believe in that. So his statement that I am a Pharisee carried a very great division in the council. And when it carried a great division, they were unwilling to oppose their own doctrine. That for us, we believe in resurrection, so we cannot oppose this doctrine that Paul believes in. Praise the living God. So that's why they sided with him. They're like, we've seen nothing wrong with this guy. So this was a very good strategy. It was a very strategic move by Paul. And then it also provided the providence of God's act to protect him, to advance the gospel, because he had to be protected. This was not the end. He had to go to Rome, remember, to go and preach. Praise the living God. So Paul wasn't just claiming this. Remember, he was trained by Gamaliel, and this Gamaliel was a Pharisee. So he truly was a Pharisee. Praise the living God. And he also knew that the highlights of these things about the resurrection and would immediately divide the council. So he knew that if I spoke about resurrection, these things are going to divide the council. And it did. It really divided them. So his statement focused, of course, like I said, shifted the focus from himself to theologians who are very debating and between two groups. What we learn from this particular passage as Paul is speaking, we learn a very few things. We learn that godly wisdom can turn opposition into opportunity. If you have this godly wisdom and you're like, okay, I'm seeing two groups that are not in sync. So I'm going to use godly wisdom to turn this opposition into opportunity. Praise the living God. This is what he did. So sometimes it's good to discern in that moment that God has put you in that situation. What am I supposed to do as a child of God? So you discern it. Praise the living God. So you don't force things. Don't put yourself that I'm going to force myself in place of defense. Sometimes you don't have to defend yourself, but look at the situation and find a way out. Praise the living God. So beyond Paul's cleverness, what we see is a moment that we see that God's hand is at work. Yes, he was wise, but then we see God at work. Praise the living God. But we also see that God sets a promise on God's promise that, you know what, take courage, I'll be with you, as we see in chapter 11. And no matter the situation, God is with Paul, even in this scenario. He has not left him. Even the wisdom that he has is coming from God. Praise the living God. So verse 11 is one of those verses that I read, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Have you ever been in a situation and just God speaks to you and tells you, you know what, Sharon, I am with you. Take courage. Sometimes you're hearing everyone giving you all the advice in the world, and it's really beautiful that people are speaking life into you. But the words that come from God are life themselves. They push you to the next stage. Because verse 11 says, that night the Lord appeared to Paul and said, be encouraged, Paul. Just as I've been a witness just as you've been a witness to me in Jerusalem, you must preach the good news in Rome as well. And this reminded me of the words that God spoke to Joshua. And he was telling him that just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Be encouraged, don't be afraid. Those words push you to certain places, and you are supported and you are encouraged in the Lord, and you don't give up and you go forward. And we're going to see how Paul is taking these words very seriously. And even as he goes on that boat and it's broken into pieces, his faith is like, God told me I should be courageous. I have to preach in Rome. So he's not scared at all. I desire to hear my father telling me that, Sharon, be encouraged. I'll be with you, even in this season, even in this circumstance. Nothing shall harm you. Those words, they can push you miles in your journey with Christ. And so these words that we see in this particular moment, I'm sure that Paul was scared when God began to speak to him. It was a moment of fear, a moment of uncertainty. What is coming? What is coming against me? Praise the living God. But God reassures his servant of his presence, that I am here with you. He ensures that, you know what, that was a divine encouragement in Paul's life, that I will sustain you in places of trial. And that is what God does. He sustains us in times of trial. Praise the living God. Let's proceed as we finish. It's beautiful when you work for God. Hear words. The next morning, a group of Jews got together and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 of them in conspiracy. They went to the leading priest and elders and told them, we have bound ourselves with an oath to eat nothing until we have killed Paul. So you and the high council should ask the commander to bring Paul back to the council again. Pretend you want to examine his case more fully. We will kill him on the way. But Paul's nephew, his sister's son, heard of their plan and went to the fortress and told Paul. Paul called for one of the Roman officers and said, take this young man to the commander. He has something important to tell him. So the officer did, explaining, Paul the prisoner called me over and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you. The commander took his hand, laid him aside and asked, what is it you want to tell me? Paul's nephew told him, some Jews are going to ask you to bring Paul before the high council tomorrow, pretending they want to get some more information, but don't do it. There are more than 40 men hiding along the way, ready to ambush him. They have vowed not to eat or drink anything until they have killed him. They are ready now, just waiting for your consent. Don't let anyone know you told me this. The commander warned the young man. Praise the living God. Beautiful portion of scripture that you look at and you're like, okay, there's a plot. They want to assassinate someone. They want to kill someone. Praise the living God. That's why I told you this chapter is full of drama. We saw drama of the season and the first season. Now we see a plot that is going to, that it wants to end Paul's life. Praise the living God. And so someone asked a question that did these guys, these guys who wanted to kill Paul die? Imagine someone telling themselves that I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to sleep until we see someone dead. And that is how the enemy plan against us. When the dark world is coming against the children of God, this is how determined they are. I hope this pushes you to a place of prayer and a place of coming to a place whereby you're just thinking and diving yourself to prayer and asking the presence of God to go with you on a daily basis. Because the enemy is determined. The Bible says in the book of Peter that the enemy is looking for whom to devour day and night. He doesn't sleep. And when you look at these men that have come together, over 40 men, and you know what they are doing? They're telling themselves they're under an oath that we're not going to eat, we're not going to drink until we see Paul dead. And they even plan something. That is how the enemy plans for us children of God. And if you don't wake up, they will kill you. Thank God there was a nephew. But imagine there was no nephew. You're not in a place of prayer. You're not in a place where you're in the presence of God. And the enemy is telling themselves that we're not going to eat. We're not going to drink until we see Paul, until we see Sharon dead. And for you, you're sleeping and eating and eating bread with butter. Praise the living God. So, and someone said, like, did this guy really die? Because they told them, if the plot, of course, was failed because there was a nephew, and they asked, did this guy really die? Did they really die? But no, they did not die. The Bible is very silent, of course, whether these people died or not. But of course, Luke does not record them starving to death. Because if they starved to death, we would have known that they really starved to death. But most people who are commentators, like most of them, they agree that they would have been released from this vow. How were they released from the vow? There was a Jewish vow that once you took it, there was and then you didn't fulfill it, there was something that you were supposed to do to undo that vow. So they would have gone to religious authorities and made sure that this vow is not completed, because the person that they have planned to kill, of course, ran away and was rescued. So when the plan failed, they must have broke the fast rather than die of starvation. So they did not die. They had to cancel their plan. So, like I said, we are seeing more than 40 men who have vowed not to eat, not to drink until they see Paul be killed. But we thank God for Paul's nephew. We don't see Paul's family here, and we don't see it anywhere. Some people say that the family left him because now he was serving the Lord. So the family was like, we are not going to be part of you. So the family would have left him because of that. Praise the living God. So we see that Paul had a family. But like I said, Paul had a sister, but his name is not given in this particular passage. His name is not, like her name is not given in this particular passage. But then we see this is the first time they're talking about his family, and we don't see it again. So it's the only direct reference to Paul's immediate family, you know what? And elsewhere, you see things like kinsmen, but you don't see like maybe a sister or something. So at other places, his family is not mentioned. But I said some people believe Paul's family disowned him when he converted to Christianity. People say that, like, I don't know if he had a wife. Even the wife was not there. So yeah. But one thing that I draw from here as I see this is that I see the nephew of Paul coming to tell him, and you wonder why a young child is there listening and making sure that, hey, I've heard these people planning, let me go and talk to my uncle about this, you know. And for me, is I see God's providence at work, you know. And God uses ordinary people, even a young nephew, a young child. And you know what? That he does that to accomplish his purpose. In every place, nothing can make God's plan to fail. Praise the living God. So he will use anyone. There are so many stories that I can bring that God uses ordinary people to see that he protects his own people. Praise the living God. So let's continue. 23 says that then the commander called 2 of his officers and ordered, get 200 soldiers ready to leave for Caesarea at 9 o'clock tonight. Also take 200 spearmen and 70 mounted troops. Provide horses for Paul to ride and get him safely to Governor Felix. Then he wrote this letter to the governor. From Claudius Lucius to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by some Jews, and they were about to kill him when I arrived with the troops. When I learned that he was a Roman citizen, I removed him to safety. Then I took him to their high council to try to learn the basis of the accusations against him. I soon discovered that the charge was something regarding their religious law, certainly nothing worthless of imprisonment or death. But when I was informed of a plot to kill him, I immediately set him to you. So I have told his accusers to bring their charges before you. So that night, as ordered, the soldiers took Paul as far as Antipatris. They returned to the fortress the next morning, while the mounted troops took him onto Caesarea. When they arrived in Caesarea, they presented Paul and the letter to the governor Felix. He read it and then asked Paul what province he was from. Caesarea. Paul answered, I will hear your case myself when accusers arrive. The governor told him. Then the governor ordered him kept in the prison at Herod's headquarters. Praise the living God. What a passage. That when the commander was told of the plan of these more than 40 men that had planned to kill him, he listened, and he sent Paul away to Felix, the governor, and he sent him to Caesarea. Praise the living God. So we see God's sovereignty through authorities. That imagine God is just like, okay, I'm going to make sure that this person is protected, but he's going through authorities. We saw God in the days of Pharaoh when he had a show, and he told Pharaoh that you think you have power. I have extraordinary power over you. I can even able to even control your heart. I can even harden your heart. Although you are God, I can still do that. That is the God we serve. So the sovereignty of God through authorities is just something that amazes me. Imagine the situation that Paul is going through. 200 spearmen, 70 mounted troops just to protect Paul. As a prisoner, praise the living God. Then the letter, he goes with a letter. He addresses to Felix, praise the living God. So the Roman officials arranged to escort Paul in safety to Governor Felix with a large military. This is a very big military that is escorting. It's like a president of some sort. Praise the living God. So what looks like imprisonment is actually God's way of transporting Paul towards Rome, because he had told him in verse 11 that be encouraged. You are going to preach the gospel even in Rome. How beautiful, praise the living God. So, and he's being transported to Rome in safety. How I love God and his hand. It's beautiful to serve the Lord. So God is fulfilling his promise that be encouraged. You're going to preach this gospel even in Rome. So for me, what I look at, you look at sometimes you look at imprisonment, sometimes you look at a situation as something that is not really good for you, and God is just doing something. He's protecting you. He's like, Sharon, you have my arms around you. You are protected. Praise the living God. So God can use even secular authorities, these people that we think that they're very carnal, and unexpected circumstances to advance his mission. That is why we see Paul is being transported, and yet God had told him that be encouraged. Just as you preach the gospel in Jerusalem, so you preach the gospel in Rome. And that's what exactly happens. We serve a God that loves us. Beyond everything else, he loves us and he wants us safe, and he will protect us all the way. Praise the living God. Thank you so much for being part of this episode. I love reading this book of Acts, and I love the fact that we are reading together, all of us. Hey, be blessed. If you're new here, subscribe. Also like, comment, and share this episode with someone else. Be blessed, children of God. Shalom, shalom, shalom.